Welcome to BetterHealthGuy Blogcasts, empowering your better health. And now, here's Scott, your BetterHealth Guy. The content of this show is for informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any illness or medical condition. Nothing in today's discussion is meant to serve as medical advice or as information to facilitate self-treatment. As always, please discuss any potential health-related decisions with your own personal medical authority.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 36 of the BetterHealthGuy blogcast series. Today's guest is Dr. Ann Louise Gittleman, and the title of the show is First Lady of Nutrition. Dr. Ann Louise Gittleman is continually breaking new ground in traditional and holistic health and is a top nutritionist, internationally recognized as a pioneer in dietary, environmental, and women's health issues. She is an award-winning New York Times best-selling author of over 30 books on health and nutrition, including diet, detoxification, women's health, men's health, perimenopause and menopause, beauty, and the environment. As one of the world's foremost experts in functional and integrative medicine, she holds a master's in nutrition education from Columbia University, has a title of certified nutrition specialist from the American College of Nutrition, and a Ph.D. in holistic nutrition. Ann Louise has also served as the chief nutritionist of Pediatric clinic at Bellevue Hospital and is the former director of nutrition at the Pritikin Longevity Center in Santa Monica, California. She has won numerous awards, including the American Medical Writers Association Award for Excellence and the Cancer Control Society's Humanitarian Award in 2016. And now, my interview with the First Lady of Nutrition, Dr. Ann Louise Gittleman. I first got sick in 1997, and your book, Guess What Came to Dinner, was one of the first books I remembered reading when I was trying to find answers for my own health challenges. And we didn't know at the time that I was also dealing with Lyme disease and mold illness, and we really were focused on Epstein-Barr virus and parasites. It is such an honor for me to have you on the show today. You've been a source of information throughout my entire journey and my ability to really help understand things and recover my own health. So I'm grateful to have you on the show today and to talk to you about how you've rewritten the rules of nutrition. Welcome, Ann Louise.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. So how did you first become interested in the field of nutrition and become known as the First Lady of Nutrition?
Well, my journey started way back in the early 70s when I was a sophomore at Connecticut College. And quite honestly, I pulled an all-nighter one night and stumbled that morning to breakfast and overheard two co-eds talking about a book called Let's Get Well by Adele Davis. There was something about Let's Get Well in the message and what they were discussing that really prompted my interest about health. The co-eds were talking about tiger milk. They were talking about brewer's yeast, and I remember running out after hearing that and getting brewer's yeast and putting it in my Dan and boysenberry yogurt at the time. My hair grew, hair on my arms grew, hair on my chest grew. It was just a miraculous thing. And I became really hooked to the concept that there was nothing that you couldn't cure if you looked at underlying diseases. And in those days, Adele Davis was the only voice of nutrition. She was in a real wilderness out there. There was nobody that was writing about this. This was the early 70s. There wasn't an internet. So I read everything I could, went to the local health food store, and became very imbued with the whole concept of nutrition. And then in 1974, to be exact, I went to visit a woman who became my mentor. Hazel Parcells, the grand dame of nutrition, at the age of 84 years young, Scott, she was holding court in 5 days that could change your life in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I learned everything that I'm now talking about now, way back over 40 years ago in those days with Dr. Parcells. So I really credit her with everything that I'm doing. And I certainly think she was decades before anybody else in terms of parasites, heavy metals, detoxification, radiation that nobody was talking about then, and the whole concept of immunity and mold illness, to be exact.
Yeah, that's amazing that she had such a grasp on things that long ago. That's fantastic. So my first introduction to you was through your book on parasites, and I think you probably were one of the earliest people really talking about parasites. And so I'm interested in what led you to write an entire book on parasites, and then how big of an issue do you think parasites are today for people that are having chronic health challenges?
Well, the whole concept of parasites is one in which you're truly opening up a can of worms. And I believe, as I learned way back in the 70s, is that it's still a major issue. I don't think you can get well from Lyme or mold or any other issue, from viral issues to bacterial issues to whatever else is going on in your system, unless you get rid of parasites, which I learned was the most immunosuppressive agent in the human body. And after seeing what comes out of people in those 5 days that changed my life back in February of 1974, I never ate out in restaurants for at least 2 to 3 years. It made that much of an impact on me. So I first learned about parasites through Dr. Parcells and was so imbued with the concept of detoxifying people, helping them with issues from their skin to their blood sugar to their immunity. I mean, this is back in the 70s. People weren't even talking about the immune system, quite frankly, way back then. But I saw such differences with people in terms of outward appearances. No more sun problems, no more problems in terms of sensitivities to foods. I mean, and this was miraculous. 7 days of a certain parasite cleanse and people were healed. So that was way back in the 70s. When I fast forward to the 80s and then went on to work at the Pritikin Longevity Center, where I was privileged to be the first director of nutrition and saw what was going on with people that were fighting heart disease and cancer and stroke and problems like that, I began to realize that if we just shored up their immune system and got rid of these underlying toxic loads, people were able to deal with all of their health issues that much more satisfactorily. So in 1991, I wrote my book, Guess What Came to Dinner. It became kind of an underground cult bestseller, Scott. I did a lot of work with people at that point who thought that they had worms, kids that had ADD, ADHD, individuals that were now learning about AIDS. We detoxified them. I worked with people with real immunosuppressive problems at that point. We saw a lot of individuals with allergies, rheumatoid arthritis, problems with their knees, their joints, their shoulders, people that were losing their hair, people that couldn't sleep. It seemed to be a very totally opportunistic invader that was affecting people, and I never knew if that came first or the disease came first. But you got rid of the parasites, you got rid of the worms. They would send all their worms to me, so I saw all kinds of things which I couldn't identify. I would then send them to a lab, and half the lab couldn't identify them either. So people were really housing 1 to 4 different varieties of parasites, and I was so interested in the topic. And here I was, this little squeamish girl from way back in Connecticut, that I studied with 2 renowned parasitologists after my stint with Dr. Parcells, and was in New York at one point with Dr. Herman Bueno, who was a World Health Organization parasitologist. And he did a tissue swab, an anal tissue swab, where he could, without sending anything to the lab, look under the microscope and tell you you had amoeba, you had giardia, you had blastocystis. He even knew that I had a parasite that I had picked up in Israel, because it was a certain kind of amoeba that was very prevalent in Jerusalem. And the guy was magnificent, and he's no longer with us. But I learned a great deal about formulation from Dr. Herman Bueno. I then went on to Dr. Lucretia Dowell in the 90s, who was a World War II Army nurse, and then looked and worked with the boys on the field and so forth, and learned about the importance of testing for these parasites by doing a purged analysis, not a random one. So all of this kind of was part of my mind bank, my data, that was what it was, my data. And then I wrote Guess What Came to Dinner, which is about all of my experiences and what I learned in the lab with Dr. Parcells, Dr. Bueno, and Dr. Dowell all came to fruition in this book, because I felt that if people didn't know what was happening to them and they couldn't figure out the underlying causes of disease, they weren't looking in the right place. So you've got to detoxify the parasites first and foremost, because it's affecting everything. I don't think people can get well from Lyme, from mold toxicity, or any other problem unless they get rid of the parasites first and foremost, deal with their livers, and then their adrenals. And all of that is in the book.
I would absolutely agree with you. One of my biggest mentors has been Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, and he really focuses on parasite treatment at the very, very early part of his overall protocols. And so I think that's absolutely in alignment with his teachings as well. Let's talk a little bit about what you recommend from a perspective of dealing with these parasites. So how does treatment potentially differ when we look at some of the larger parasites, some of the worms, versus some of the protozoan type organisms, like you mentioned blastocystis, for example, or Giardia? And then I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the products that you've created in this realm. I know that you have some products that have been very, very helpful for people dealing with parasites, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about those.
Okay, so this is a very loaded question. So the big parasites that we see, and when we do testing, it's not totally accurate. So I first want to discuss that, if I may. The lab that we use is Diagnostics. They're the best lab, quite frankly, that I've been able to find, but they're not totally accurate because there are 134 different varieties of parasites. They only identify a handful. So they can only identify what they know to test for. That means that you can get a lot of false negatives, which means that you have to do a cleanse anyways if you are suffering from any of the symptoms, which would include the inability to metabolize sugar, the inability to lose weight, to gain weight, bruxism at night when you're grinding your teeth, problems with your hair, your skin, your nails, issues with your joints because there's parasitic infestation sometimes in the synovial fluid. So having said that, you've got to do a general cleanse regardless of the testing, which is notoriously inaccurate. And now, since we don't do a purge testing, it's random testing because they have now outlawed. We used to use the fleet phosphate soda, and now the FDA has made that forbidden. We can't really test accurately. I was taught that the only time you could really tell what was far up into the system and deep within the colon walls was by doing a purge. And it was usually the 4th to 8th stool sample after you went 4 or 5 times that you could find something viable. So having said that about the testing, notoriously inaccurate, I decided to look at the most prevalent parasites. So when it comes to the big guys, we're talking about worms, we're talking about flukes. And we certainly know about flukes thanks to the work of Hulda Clark, may she rest in peace. So when we're talking about worms, we see a lot of Ascaris lumbricoides, which actually looks like an earthworm. You see a lot of threadworms. We see a lot of hookworms, and now most recently tapeworm and ropeworm, which we have now identified as being a real issue with people. So having said that, I thought to myself, what did the Native Americans do? What did Dr. Parcells use? So I conglomerated what Dr. Parcells used, the Native American lore that I found, and created a product called my colon cleansing kit, which deals with the large guys first and foremost, and the baby ones. For the large ones, we use wormwood, we use male fern, we use cloves, we use butternut, we use black walnut, and one herb that you don't find in any other product out there because most of these people don't do their initial research. They just look on the internet to see what the latest, greatest herbs are. The one that we use is centaury, which was noted by the Native Americans because it was an herb that allowed the parasites like your hookworm and your tapeworm to lose their grip on the intestines. It actually relaxed them, it made them drunk, so to speak, and they just fly out of your system. So when you take our products, be prepared to see something come out and then give thanks, get on your hands and knees and say, wow, what a load off the immune system. Those are the biggies when it comes to the big guys. The big guys are easier to get rid of than the microscopic vampires, the small ones. Those can be really threatening to health. They really can be. You've got your amoeba, you've got your Giardia, which is very prevalent and I think can remain dormant. The Giardia loves to go to the gallbladder, the bile ducts. And so a lot of times when there's gallbladder disease that's unresolved, it's because you've got a Giardia problem. So you think back to all the times you could have been camping, or you could have taken some stream water that looked pure but isn't as tainted with beaver fever, so to speak. And we have had clients that have had to have their whole colon removed because they've had a cryptosporidium issue that they didn't treat properly. You've also got blastocystis, which is an interesting organism because it kind of morphed from being a fungal organism to now being a full-fledged parasite that we now believe is pathogenic. That's a tough one to deal with. Sometimes our products can deal with that. Sometimes your SF722 from Thorn is what's also needed. So I'm very amenable to using the kinds of herbs and botanicals, particularly grapefruit seed extract, which can get at least 800 different viruses, bacteria, and fungal infections in conjunction with all the other herbs. Ours are pH balanced. What we learned was that you can also harm the host when you're trying to get rid of parasites. So this is supporting the host with a pH that is perfectly stable for the blood sugar, as well as all the other organs and systems. And we use a little bit of cranberry, which we find to be an interesting substance because the Native Americans used it for parasitic detoxification. So all of those things are uniquely in the products. We were the first on the market, Scott. We then had a multi-level marketing company that tried to duplicate our products, but not successfully. So we're the originals. We've had the most, I'd say, experience with before and afters. And sometimes when people do want the testing and they insist on testing because seeing is believing with a lab test, we see a lot of very positive results from using this particular formula. I tell people when they don't know what's going on, they have an autoimmune situation and they have a low white blood count below 5. It's a real tip-off with all of this, and a high eosinophil count and a high monocyte count. And what they need to do is to do a parasite cleanse, and then they can retest. I suggest they do a 2-week on, 5-day off. You have to rest the liver. The liver is really the organ that starts to metabolize and get rid of all this stuff. It's a 2-week on, 5-day off, 2-week on, 5-day off, 2-week on, 5-day off. It can take 3 months to get rid of all of this. And then right around the full moon, you hit it again 2 days before the full moon, the day of the full moon, and 2 days after, because they do seem to be much more active around that particular time of the month. And I have seen that time and time again. The old-fashioned herbalists that I've chatted with, including my dear departed teacher, who is Hannah Kroger, always believed in a full moon cleanse. So that is what I do. To me, this is ancient nutrition meeting modern science. And you must look for parasites. Your doctor won't ask you where you've traveled. Your doctor's not going to ask you if you've just had a lot of sushi, because they don't know to ask these things. And so I believe you've got to take it upon yourself, like the Europeans, to detoxify and deworm yourself at least twice a year. I love the spring and I love the fall.
So is that kit that you have there, how is that different from the VermaKey and ParaKey products, or is that part of what's in that box that you just showed us?
It's in here. We've got the ParaKey, the Verma Plus, and the FloraKey, which we allow you to take after you do the initial cleansing. We don't suggest, it's very interesting, and I learned this from my parasitology teachers, we don't suggest that people use a lot of probiotics during the time of cleansing, nor should you be using heavy-duty antioxidants. So we relegate you to about 500 mgs of vitamin C and maybe 400 IUs of vitamin E.
Because the parasites themselves can use that as
because
a protective
you can actually
mechanism.
Feed the parasites, yes. And this is from Dr. Herman Bueno. I wish he were alive today. There was so many nuggets. I mean, I would go to his home. I would have meals with this gentleman. He was very, very charming from Colombia. And I was sitting there, and here I was, just a young pup at that time, taking prodigious notes. But he was so informed. And I do remember him telling me one thing, which was that he had never seen a case of cancer where the individual wasn't loaded with parasites, 1 to 4.
So one of the questions that I get a lot from people is about ropeworm, which you mentioned, and there's a lot of debate about whether or not ropeworm is itself a parasite, whether it's possibly a biofilm community of lots of different organisms. What are your thoughts on ropeworm, and then how do you approach treating that specific parasite if that's what we're thinking it is?
You know, it's funny. It kind of popped up about 10 to 15 years ago, and I don't know a whole lot about it. All I can say is that people will talk about these pieces of rope that come out when they do our program. So all I care about at this point is that it comes out of your system. I don't know the physiology. I don't know the pathology. I know from nothing in reference to it, because my original teachers whom I learned from are no longer here to kind of point a finger at what's really going on. All I can say is that if you do one of these cleanses and you take a stick and look in your stool, you'll see all kinds of webs, all kinds of little ropey, filmy, thready things, and those should not be in your body. It's a good thing they're coming out. And by the way, and I don't want to forget to say this if I can just jump in, Scott.
Sure.
There's certain foods that you should be eating to parasitize yourself, to deworm yourself kind of regularly. Because detox, in this day and age, Scott, detox is a daily affair. It's not a seasonal event.
I agree.
So we got to get real about this. You can't go back to eating your old food and your old lifestyle, not if you want to be healthy and healed in 2017 and beyond. So the foods that are anti-parasitic are, believe it or not, mugwort tea, not such a favorite, but thyme is very good. Sage is very good. And pumpkin seeds and papaya seeds. So if you can get yourself some papaya seeds, it's a great idea to pop them into your blender and put it into your smoothie on a daily basis. I've also had success with people with food-grade diatomaceous earth popped into a smoothie, maybe 1 tablespoon.
Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So many people that are dealing with Lyme disease also have these underlying parasitic infestations that need to be dealt with as well. And so what are your thoughts on approaching recovery from something like Lyme disease?
You know, I had Lyme, so I'm one of those people. And what I did is I shored up my immune system. I made sure that my white blood count was above 5. That was very important for me. That kind of gave me the push to be able to heal myself and allow my immune system to kick in. And I did that by doing a parasite cleanse regularly, hitting it at the full moon, number 2, to get rid of one of these major toxic loads. I also took, if I may suggest, I also took Cemento, which is a NutraMedics product, I believe.
Yes.
After having one of the tests that I did. I took Cemento pretty regularly, did some of Dr. Chang's herbs for about 3 months and retested, and voila, they couldn't find anything. So I did this by shoring up my immune system, getting that white blood count elevated, and also supporting my adrenals, because I think, and nobody's talking about this, but I see it because I work with many, many clients on so many of these forums and do a lot of summits these days, that if your immune system is shored up, but your adrenals are not working properly, you can't get well. You're not going to have the vital energy. You will just not have the energy. So making sure that you're taking something that's rather adaptogenic for your adrenals is really, really important. It's gravely overlooked in all of these protocols that I have seen. So I have something called the adrenal formula. For those with low blood pressure, it's a godsend. The adrenal formula, it's 7, 11, and 3. Those are the adrenal times. 1 to 2 at those times. If that doesn't do the trick and you have higher blood pressure, then I think getting some pantethine is incredibly helpful. 1 to 2 grams a day, or some clean ashwagandha, and it's got to be clean. If you have a nightshade concern, then ashwagandha maybe is out the window, but I like ashwagandha, and there's some really good places where they have ashwagandha these days that are not from some of the countries where we know it's loaded with lead or arsenic. So I'm a big believer in that, maybe a little rhodiola from Siberia, but getting your adrenals is increasingly important. So I want to make sure that we really emphasize that point. And I'm sure you found that in the work that you've done as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would say that anyone dealing with chronic Lyme, that adrenals is generally one of the things that needs to be supported. And oftentimes that the person going through Lyme recognizes needs to be supported, and how much better they feel when they do support it. So getting a lot of great little gems and pearls from you in this conversation. So I appreciate that. It's definitely helpful for people. For those people that aren't aware of the fat flush, and I can't imagine that many people haven't heard about that, but I'm interested in maybe a little bit around the premise behind the fat flush and how it boosts our metabolism, and then what is fat flushing for those that don't know.
Well, that was my book that came out in 2001. You know, for years I was known as the parasite lady, as the worm lady, and then I shifted gears and put a little chapter about detoxification in a later book that came out called Beyond Pritikin. There was one one chapter in there called the 2-week fat flush. Well, it became a very popular program, and the whole Northern California, where I know you're from, went on my fat flush program. And people lost weight, they detoxified, and it was really an elimination diet. That's how it started. I took people in the 80s off of grains. That's not new news. I took them off of wheat particularly, but other grains as well, off of sugar, any yeast-producing products. People lost weight, they detoxified, they gave their liver a rest. So the whole concept is food allergies, food sensitivities, really are toxic for the system. And if you don't clean out and give your liver a rest, then your liver can't process all of the toxic metabolites that are going on from regular digestion, from problems in the air, the wind, the water these days. And now we've got the GMOs to contend with, and of course, parasites. So your liver is a fat-burning organ. We don't recognize that it is, but it makes bile, a quart of bile a day. Bile's job is to metabolize fats, and it's stored in your gallbladder. It comes out and is secreted when you're eating some kind of fat. If your body can't digest and metabolize fat properly, and if you don't have a gallbladder, you need some sort of bile, I would say therapy, like a bile building product. It's very important for people that can't lose weight, that can't gain weight. They also know that bile is a detoxification method of the liver, very much overlooked because we think of phase 1 and phase 2 detox in the liver. But bile is a detox method, so it's got to be high quality, it's got to be thin, you've got to have enough choline, enough good lecithin, inositol, maybe some beets, beetroot, which will thin the bile. Lemon juice and water in the morning will thin the bile, and then you can detoxify properly and also carry and utilize your fat-soluble vitamins. And you've got vitamin A for infection fighting. Maybe people that are getting sick these days have a subclinical vitamin A deficiency because nobody's digesting fats. You're eating it because you're on a keto diet or a primal diet or a paleo diet, but who knows if you're digesting and metabolizing it. So you've got to get your bile functioning properly. You got your vitamin A that's bile-connected, vitamin D, we all know about D, vitamin E, vitamin K, which will keep calcium where it belongs, and certainly vitamin E. So it's extremely important for the utilization of the fat-soluble vitamins. So that book would be really good for people to read. We have 10 underlying health factors which really impinge and sabotage weight loss, but it also affects overall healing. So you got to get your bile functioning, your adrenals functioning. It is a do-it-yourself job keeping healthy in this day and age. It's not an
I agree. It is absolutely a do-it-yourself job. So let's talk a little bit more about fat. So you mentioned weight loss. Most people think, well, to lose weight, we need to be low fat. But why is good fat actually good for weight loss and for overall health? And then what are some of your favorite health-promoting fats?
So good fats trigger fat loss because it's almost like it's a hormonal thing. We now know that health has a lot to do with hormones, and fat has a lot to do with stabilizing your blood sugar. It also is the trigger for eicosanoids, which are very helpful for your immune system. And the right kind of fats have a fat burning effect, whereby sugar has an insulin potentiating effect so that you're gaining weight. Insulin is a fat promoting hormone. So what you want to do is make sure you have a ratio of 4-to-1 in your diet. And what is that? The good omega-6s, not the altered, not the commercial omega-6s, the good omega-6s to omega-3s, 4-to-1. I'm in love with safflower oil, if you can get the unrefined one, not high oleic, but high linoleic acid safflower oil, because that will substantiate your cell membranes, because everybody is weak in cell membranes. We all know about omega-3s, but we forget about omega-6s. I love hemp seed oil. So if you want to get the right fats in your diet, get these some hemp seed oil. It's in every health food store in the country. It's about a 4-to-1, maybe it's a 3-to-1 ratio in favor of the omega-6s. And that will be good for your skin, your hair, your nails, and it will trigger weight loss. I'm in love with that. Coconut oil for some people is not tolerated well, but it's good for the thyroid. So a little coconut oil for cooking because it's so stable. I cook in ghee all the time because it has the highest smoking point. But I'm in love with that hemp seed oil, so I don't want to talk about any other oil.
Fantastic. That's great. Yeah, I've had my 2 tablespoons of healthy fats already this morning in my smoothie. And definitely when I first started doing that, I thought, oh my goodness, am I going to get fat by eating fat? And the reality was I definitely did not. So I think it's...
No, people don't get fat. But when you think of omega-6s, think of the skin. It's your skin's best friend. Skin and the activation of brown fat, which they now think is the new obesity cure. So you got to get those omega-6s. Don't believe the nonsense about omega-6s being bad for you and inflammatory. Those are the altered omega-6s, just like you can alter omega-3s, and it's unusable for the body. And of course, we're over margarine. I mean, we don't even have to discuss how bad hydrogenated fats and trans fats are. But I think that if we get into the right fats and maybe some healthy fish once or twice a week, but if you're going to eat fish, you always eat it cooked. We do not eat sushi because we never know if that fish has been candled. And this whole concept should be very disheartening to you, because when you're eating sushi, a good sushi chef will candle the fish. What does that mean? They take the fish and they look to see if there are any strings of worms, so they just pull them out.
No, I don't eat sushi.
I'm appetizing. Well, it's a very interesting thing, because I digress a little bit, but not really, because it is a bit on topic. But we posted something on my Facebook page which got a lot of play. And it was a picture which apparently wasn't verified by one of my team members about a man from China that had eaten sushi, and he was loaded with all these
Yep, I saw that.
Parasites. Well, the reality is, the message is you shouldn't be eating sushi because you can get sick from sushi, and people get very sick very frequently. This guy apparently was eating pork, and maybe it was uncooked pork, and he had pork tapeworm. But the concept here is that sushi, although it may be delicious, should only be enjoyed when you do a California roll. And I'll leave it at that.
Very good. Absolutely. So I know in the 4-to-1 ratio, I know of Patricia Kane's Body Bio Balance Oil as one that's in that ratio. Do you also have a product that kind of fits your ideal scenario for healthy fats?
I don't. I love Patricia Kane's work. I think she's highly, highly underrated in terms of what she needs, what that information needs to be. Mm-hmm. Get hemp seed oil. The oils that I love that are omega-6s that you need to be bringing back into your diet, which will be the focus of a new book coming out next year, because I'm so passionate about it, because there's so much nonsense. People just get on a bandwagon, they rehash nonsense. The omega-6s. So let me tell you, we've got hemp seed oil, the Body Bio I use in my own home, which is a 4-to-1 ratio, and she uses, I think, sunflower seed oil, and she uses flaxseed oil in that. But there's also a wonderful oil called pine nut oil. And now that we're talking about, parasites, the pine nut oil has the ability to heal the mucosal membranes. So if you want to do yourself a favor, from your mouth to your anus, so to speak, it will heal all those mucosal membranes, including problems with GERD, if you have any regurgitation and you have irritation in the esophagus. So it's 1 teaspoon of pine nut oil 20 minutes before you eat has an amazing effect on the system. It's got a certain fatty acid that's similar to GLA, exceedingly healing, delicious as well, and it's an appetite suppressant. So I say bring on the omega-6.
Wow. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about how detoxification is connected to our support of the liver, our support for the lymphatic system, and do toxins actually make us fat?
Well, toxins are stored in the fatty tissues. So yes, they can. And there's certain toxins that are known as obesogens in this day and age. And that was research that was done, I think, in 2004 by Bruce Bloomberg, if I'm not mistaken. I think he was at UCLA. And he just verified and justified everything that I have ever felt, everything that I intuited in reference to some of these chemicals. So we do know that BPA is extremely estrogenic. We know that there's certain pesticides or certain sprays that are estrogenic. So plastics, pesticides. You've got elements also in the environment where people are getting xenoestrogens from a variety of other issues and substances. So it's very important that if, in fact, you feel that you are too estrogenic, which you can test for, then you get on a program to release all that and make sure you're taking something that helps your estrogen metabolism. The elements that I think people should take which will ensure the ability to utilize estrogen properly from the environment and otherwise, would be your choline, your inositol, and methionine, enabled to the tune of 500 milligrams per meal. Exceedingly important. And I also think that that substance called DIM, which people can get in health food stores, is very, very important.
So we've talked a little bit about the importance of ongoing daily detoxification, especially in today's modern toxic world. What are some of the toxins that concern you the most? And what are some of the solutions that you think people should explore to live most healthily in our toxic world?
The toxins that concern me most are GMOs, because we don't know how the hell they operate in your body. So we've got the GMOs. I'm also concerned about the toxins that are the non-ionizing radiation toxins, non-ionizing radiation, which is your cell phone toxins that I've written about. So it's your cell phones, your Wi-Fi, your smart meters, all of those things. 5G I'm concerned about. I'm very sensitive to those kinds of frequencies. So I'm concerned about that and what that's doing to your adrenal glands, because it's totally affecting your cortisol surges and plunges. I'm concerned about heavy metals. I'm concerned about too much copper, too much nano aluminum that's in the chemtrails that you can just take a look at in the sky and see planes that are circling the sky. I'm concerned about the barium we're finding in people's hair, too much strontium we're finding with tissue mineral analysis. Concerned still about fluoride, the fluoride that's in white tea, green tea, and black tea. I'm concerned about aluminum, not just with the nano aluminum, but that still could be in some of your cooking utensils. And I'm also concerned about something that nobody's looking for, which is nickel. I had a client that had all kinds of issues emanating from her lungs, and we found through a special DNA test that she was loaded with nickel. I mean, where's that coming from, other than your teeth, which she had no fillings or any crowns or anything to speak of? So yeah, we live in a toxic world. So what do? You have to detox regularly. You take your lemon and water. You make sure that your bile is thinned and working properly with a supplement. We have one called Bile Builder, which you can check out, but do something similar. What else you would do? I'm a big believer in colonics. I have a colon hydrotherapy machine in my house. I take a colonic once a month. I used to take it once every 4 months, but it's now once a month. I'm a big believer in coffee enemas. I adore coffee enemas. I'm not such a big believer in taking coffee through the mouth, but I love it in the other route.
I totally agree. That's absolutely been probably my most helpful intervention when I was really struggling with Lyme and mold illness, especially for the inflammation and pain, was the coffee enemas.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable with coffee. And that has been it's something I learned from Dr. Parcells, who taught it to William Donald Kelly, who is Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez's teacher. So I've been doing some coffee enemas pretty regularly for the past 40 years. I mean, it's remarkable what that does. I don't take it the other way because I'm very sensitive to caffeine. So yeah, I'm a big believer in coffee enemas, and I'm glad you agree, because I think it's Excellent. An extremely important intervention.
So you mentioned fluoride. How does fluoride impact weight, and how does fluoride impact the thyroid? So why is it important that we're consuming only pure water?
So the issue with fluoride is a real problem. And this is what the issue with fluoride is all about. Fluoride is very important because we've got an issue with fluoride taking the place of iodine. So fluoride displaces iodine. It's a halogen which can displace iodine. The issue with green tea, black tea, and white tea is really interesting because we don't know what kind of fluoride is in the tea. Many people think it's an aluminum fluoride product that the tea plant, which is a bioaccumulator, is picking up, just from the environment per se. So knowing that that's the case, it also will make your bones very, very brittle. So fluoride, for many different reasons, including weight loss, I think is very toxic. Fluoride can affect acne. If you've got a kid, if you've got a young child, if you've got a young child as well as a teenager with a problem with acne, then what we know that we need to do is get rid of the fluoride. So it's in kombucha big time because it's made with tea. You've got it in the white tea, the green tea, the black tea. You've got fluoride in your toothpaste. You got it in your water. It's all over the place. So I say get rid of the fluoride and you'll clean up your skin. It's a big issue. It truly is.
I agree. And I think one of the things people don't always realize is that many of the water filtration things don't actually address the fluoride. So you have to very specifically look for ones that are removing the fluoride from the water that you're drinking as well.
Yes, and the fluoride removing filter can be gotten if you call my official distributor at the Unikey Health Systems. They have water filters that not only remove fluoride, but parasites. See, because a lot of the water filtration systems, it's a good thing you mentioned this, don't remove parasites. This is a special ceramic filter with a very fine pore mesh attachment that removes everything. So it's very, very important.
Fantastic. Yeah, I know in water, especially the Giardia and Cryptosporidium, that's one of the things that's also important to think about in terms of filtration. I'm interested in your thoughts about the impact of water damaged buildings, those people that are getting exposed to mold, that's also making them toxic, it's making them more inflamed. What are your thoughts on mold illness?
Oh, it's huge. It is a major epidemic. Isn't it about 50% of all the buildings in this country that are water damaged? I mean, think about it. I had my own issues with it, which has made me sensitive ever since. I grew up in Connecticut, Lyme country, number one, but who knew back then? And I used to study downstairs in the basement. There was something about being in the basement, in that moldy basement, that we didn't know it had mold, by the way, but my parents lived in a home where the water table was very, I guess, low. There was a lot of water that, would accumulate. You'd see it around the circle in the land surrounding the home. We lived in a circle. There was no real good drainage. And when we finally sold that house, which was, many years later, we found there was black mold, particularly in the basement, specifically in the area where I would sit. I was almost addicted to it and study. So for years, I've had clogged sinuses, had no concept of why. When we moved here to Coeur d'Alene, before my home was built, we lived in a home that was built by a builder. We lived in his home. It was the builder's home. His wife had just died of lung cancer, Scott. My husband got very sick living in that home. I didn't know what it was. He couldn't turn his neck one day. I went to the doctor. I took him to ER. God only knows what. And somehow somebody said, get the house checked for mold. So we had a remediation service. They found black mold right around the chair where he was sitting, because it was also a low water table, and in the shower area. And I thought to myself, this builder is going to be excited to learn that we now know what affected his wife. Well, I couldn't have been more wrong, because we soon got an eviction notice from this rental. And we then moved into a hotel. So this is a very incendiary topic, to say the least. But my heart goes out to anybody that's been affected by mold. And I know that you have to do as much as you can. There are ways in which you can do ozone, I believe, is now shot into the gas, I think, is shot into the sinuses. And then there's a mold rinse, which I also have. And it hurts so much that I would never do it again, with little drops of iodine. But I can send that information to you.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, and it's also one of those things that people that are dealing with Lyme, and they're very focused on the Borrelia, Bartonella, and Babesia microbes that are known to be associated with Lyme. But I always urge people, even before they start going down the Lyme path, to make sure that their environment that they're in every day is safe for their recovery. And if you don't do that, everything you do to treat the Lyme piece or whatever the other issue is, it's really an uphill battle, because you are surrounded by your kryptonite on a daily basis.
That's exactly correct. And so I had a building biologist come into the home that we built after that terrible experience in the rental with the black mold. And a building biologist came in to make sure we were mold free, EMF free. I live in a wireless home, by the way. You come into my house, I take your shoes and I take your cell phone away. And then you can get it when you go out if you're good. But to be honest with you, a building biologist, and there are building biologists that come to the home and assess it for all those things. It can be a lifesaver. We have the best water filtration now in my home, because we found uranium in my water. So we have water filtration that removes everything possibly. It's a whole house systemic water filtration without the fluoride, without the parasites, etc. And we also have the water filtration, the air filtration. We've got two different kinds of HEPA type filters in terms of getting rid of the mold and getting rid of particulates. So yeah, you can't be too careful in this day and age.
That's
it's
great.
Challenging. You have to be a health warrior. There's no question.
I absolutely agree. So we mentioned the gallbladder, and one of the things that's always been interesting to me is people will get their gallbladder removed and then they'll say, well, fortunately it was a non-essential part of my body that I didn't really need, and so the fact that I had to have it surgically removed is not going to impact my health in a negative way. So I'm interested in your thoughts on the gallbladder. And then for those people who have had to have their gallbladder removed, what do they need to do to really optimize their health and be able to still benefit from the fat-soluble vitamins like A, E, K, and D?
Well, the gallbladder is not a throwaway organ, so let's get that clear. So the gallbladder is a storage tank, but I think it's almost connected to the immune system, if you must know the truth. So it's a storage tank for bile. So the liver secretes the bile, and it's a storage tank for that bile. So when you're eating something that's fatty, it'll trigger the ability of the gallbladder to secrete the bile, which will then metabolize your fat, break it down into usable particles, and also allow your system to carry all the fat-soluble vitamins. If you don't have a gallbladder, number one. Number two, what's going to happen is there'll be a constant dripping of the bile into your small intestine, which can be very irritating to the small intestine, number one. With proper bile is the best lubrication. If you're constipated, get thee some bile. It will make you go to the bathroom like nothing else. Bile is extremely lubricating. You need the bile to break down toxins. You need the bile to break down hormones. So you got to get your bile. I mean, there's just not a question about it. And I write about it in the new Fat Flush Plan. So if you're not convinced, just go get that book. You will be convinced. People that now take a ox bile supplement, and we have a bile building product, it's called Bile Builder, will report that they lose weight, they can now detoxify, that their eyesight has improved, particularly night vision, because I think they're assimilating and utilizing their vitamin A. They have problems with circulation. That improves because of vitamin E. So all the fat-soluble vitamins that nobody's getting and digesting really need that bile to be metabolized and utilized. So we can't emphasize this enough. It's extremely important. And I also think that years ago, the initial health pioneers of the 20th century used to talk about bile and ox bile and bile salts. People have kind of forgotten that in their desire to get to a healthy diet, like a ketogenic diet. Well, suppose you don't have a gallbladder. What are you supposed to do? You've got to have your bile working properly. Anytime you eat something with fat, you need a little bile to help digest it and metabolize it properly.
And I understand from one of the articles that I read on your site that there's also a connection between the bile and the thyroid that I think most people probably never made that connection. So can you tell us about that?
It's pretty unusual, but there was some research that came out in Finland, of all places, that suggested that with the secretion of bile, your thyroid can then secrete something that allows the system to transform its non-active T4 into activated T3. And people that somehow can activate that can lose 70% more weight. It's fascinating.
That's amazing. Really, it really is amazing.
That is truly amazing.
It seems that research is showing more and more that much of our health revolves around the microbiome and the beneficial flora and the beneficial bugs that live within us. What are your thoughts and recommendations for improving the health of the microbiome?
I couldn't agree more. I think it's all about the microbiome in terms of weight loss, in terms of the gut, in terms of your hormones, in terms of calcium metabolism. I believe you should be eating a little fermented food every day. I mean, I think that kimchi is totally outstanding. Bubby's sauerkraut would be something else I would recommend. Maybe a little miso. Pickles, Bubby's pickles, which are, I think, cultured the right way, I think are very important. But if you have a really sick person, you can't give them too much too soon, because that will create much too much gas. So a little bit goes a long way. I'm in favor of a very high quality probiotic. I don't think more is better. I think less is more, because I think if you introduce too many of these organisms into the system, your body goes into autoimmune response. So not more than 10 billion CFUs per shot. And I believe that there are wonderful books that are out there. Everything that's being said about the microbiome, I couldn't negate. It's very important for brain health. There's a gut-brain connection. All of that is totally, totally viable and totally true.
So I asked my listeners for things they'd like to hear you respond to. And one of the things that came up was hair loss, particularly in women, and some of the causes of hair loss, how that maybe ties in with excess copper, and then what you recommend for helping people address hair loss.
Hair loss, yes. Copper affects hair strands, and it affects vitamin C, which is very important for the system. So you've got to make sure that you don't have any fillings from 1976, which is the year that they started adding copper to the amalgam mix. So that's number one. Number two, for copper, get yourself tested. Don't guess. Get a blood test. Get a copper-zinc ratio blood test, which you can at request a test. And then if you've got some issues with copper, do whatever you can to reduce your copper load from your foods, from your hormones. Make sure that you're not taking too much estrogen, because estrogen is connected to copper. Get more zinc into your program, maybe 45 milligrams, maybe more. And also some molybdenum, which is totally, totally overlooked and underrated, maybe 500 mcgs per day. So I think copper is a big deal for hair loss. Iron is another big deal, and iron and copper are kind of very similar. They go together in the whole mineral wheel of things. So just check your iron. Sometimes maybe a little 18 milligrams of a gentle, non-constipating iron will do the trick. As well as your thyroid, check your function and make sure you're getting enough selenium, which is important for the T4, T3 conversion.
Fantastic. Gosh, you're just full of all kinds of great things. So you mentioned estrogen in that comment. Let's touch a little bit on hormones and your thoughts on the importance of hormone replacement as we age, and which, if any, hormones do you think that people need to consider?
It's a tricky bit. I'm glad you asked. It's such a tricky business. Everybody wants to know the formula and how much of this, and you have to be your own, I don't want to say guinea pig, but you have to be your own gauge in terms of what works for you. I believe that you have to be very careful with all the hormones. Personally, I would use a little bioidentical, maybe a kind of bioidentical cream on days. If you've stopped menstruating, if you're beyond menstruation, it's days 1, 2, 25 every day, just a little bit. Then I would use twice as much progesterone on days 12 through 25, twice as much progesterone. But whenever you use your biased, which is your natural bioidentical estrogen, you always balance it with your progesterone. So progesterone is throughout the 25-day cycle. For 5 days, you rest, give everything a chance to clear out. I think testosterone in measured amounts is also very important, particularly if you're concerned about bone loss, your libido. And I think that it's also important to perhaps test for DHEA, but that's the most tricky of all, because you never know what it's going to turn into.
Right.
So exactly. That's what I would do. That's what seems to work for me. If you're a female and there's dryness down below, you've got to take a little estriol cream. You can check that and get some pelvic work. There are great people out there, and you may not know this, Scott, but I'm going to tell your female viewers, your audience, that there's women that do, it's pelvic floor work, I think is what it's called. I think I have some information about it in this book, The New Fat Flush Plan. But pelvic floor work to open things up, to start lubrication, very important for females out there. There's a lot.
Fantastic. Yeah, very, very good. So let's talk a little bit about EMFs. You had another book that I also have, which is Zapped. And Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt has talked about the role of EMFs in chronic health conditions for some time as well. And as you mentioned earlier, with some of the new 5G and other things, it seems like this is a problem that's only going to get worse. Yeah. So I'm interested in, this was another thing that listeners, knowing that you've written about this, they were interested in your recommendations for mitigating and reducing the harmful EMFs. And then one of the listeners from Australia actually asked if there's a certain EMF protection device that you really feel is helpful for people, or if any of them seem to help.
So that's a pretty loaded question. So where do we begin? It's a problem because it's just another toxic load that affects your adrenals. Remember, we talked about how important the adrenals were. What I do at night to regenerate, this is what I do at night. I shut off the electricity to the main bedroom. So we have a little thing.
Demand switch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do that little thing and it shuts it off, just the electricity to the main bedroom. And I sleep so much better. So that is putting my body back into a natural earthing state, so to speak. I do that. My house, again, has been EMF proofed. I have the bedroom. It has a black carbon paint, which protects against EMFs. And I have special curtains. This is a very cool thing. I used to sleep in a canopy.
I do sleep in a canopy, by the way.
I used to, but it got too dusty.
Yeah.
Then there was the dust problem, which is a whole other issue. Well, there's the canopy, but we have made that, we've turned around and made that into curtains, so it blocks the EMFs from coming. I think it's brilliant.
And it's interesting because that's the same thing at Dr. Klinghart's office at Sophia Health in Seattle. They've painted the walls and then they have that canopy material over all the windows as well. So it seems that the experts are doing it.
Oh, he's into you got to live it, he's into that. And I've had some of the best people, because I know these building biologists come to the house and test, so I know that it's helping block. I don't use my cell phone very much. I have 3 different protections on it. If you go on my website, you'll see 2 different companies, and I can never think of the links to them directly, but it's on the home page. I think it's go to the home page and you scroll down and it's there someplace. I have a case for them, but beyond the case, I have something from Energy Tools. Mm-hmm. Energy Tools. It is it changes some frequency. I visited with a Russian physicist who I was very impressed with, who's got quite a background, and that's also stuck on my phone. And then there's something else I'm looking into, so I'll have to report back to you. It's another device that I'm looking into. I've worn things. I have pendants. I had earrings at one point. Now I try not to have as much metal as possible. This is a tip. You shouldn't be wearing much metal.
Because you're an antenna.
Is an antenna. So I just, for these occasions, will wear my special turquoise earrings, real turquoise earrings, turquoise bracelet. But other than that, I wear very little of that. And everything is now, I use a silk
fantastic
necklaces, silk necklaces, or leather. And my husband does not wear. He's from Texas. He used to wear these big belt buckles that were metal. So he doesn't use that anymore because that's targeting right into that sensitive area. He's using, I think it's wood, a special kind of wood. And he no longer wears a Rolex. He was always proud of his Rolex because he's from Texas, bigger is better. Now he has a different kind of, it's like a Brighton, I think that's the word, Brightman or Brighton watch, which is what all these high-tech people use, which does not act as an antenna. So, I mean, there are things that you have to do. Get rid of the metal fillings. That's going to act as an antenna.
And that was going to be my comment as well. And then we put all this metal into our mouth, which is so close to our brain and all of the nerves and everything else.
Oh,
it's amazing.
I know. It's what the body can withstand. It's like amazing. I had 13 fillings at one point. Then I went from there to a high copper, which made me crazy. And any of these books that I've written are because I went through it myself.
So you wrote a book on EMFs. People often think that the concept of pulsed electromagnetic fields is also something they should avoid because everyone hears that EMF is bad. But what are your thoughts on the benefits of pulsed electromagnetic fields? I know you've written about that on your website as well.
I think they can be very healing and very helpful. I used to sleep with one of those. I don't remember, I can't tell you the brand name of it, but I used to sleep with one of them. That can be very healing. There's a lot to be said for all of that. You just have to get the right frequencies. I think that's what the key is. So I'm a big believer.
And do you think that earthing or grounding is also something that can help in our ability to discharge some of these EMF exposures that we all face?
You know, I'm aware of the dirty electricity, and I can tell you from my humble use of it, I'm traveling all the time. So when I go to a hotel, I plug myself in. I use a wristband. You don't have to buy anything expensive. Forget about the sheets because they wear out after several washings. So I do a wristband, and it makes a huge difference.
Great.
Yeah, I'm a believer, and I know Clint Ober personally, and he has the utmost integrity. I'm a Big believer.
I've met him once, and I also have one of his wristbands. So yeah, it's interesting. We've come across a lot of the same people, which is
well,
fantastic.
these are good people. These are good people. They're doing good work. Not all of us have all the answers, so you have to be very, how should we say? You've got to just be very varied in your exposure, because you can learn something from everybody.
Absolutely.
But as a female, I have a different perspective, because as a female, we have these hormonal issues that really can impact your system. And that's really where the difference comes in, because males to handle things very differently than females. Females seem to have more sensitivity in some of these areas. So I'm very delighted that, you are holding the flame for these males, holding the space for the males out there, Scott.
So what are your thoughts on stem cell therapy? And do you think that it has a place in the future of preventative and anti-aging medicine?
Yes, provided it's taken from your own fat cells. I'm a big believer in stem cell therapy.
Great.
Most definitely. Most definitely.
So I know that you have experienced all kinds of health and wellness tools over the years. What are the ones that you personally just could not live without?
My colonic machine. If I had to choose one thing, it'd be my colon hydrotherapy machine. Now, I am blessed because the woman who is my personal chef is also a colon hydrotherapist. So we joke. She feeds us and she cleans us is what she does. She's just extraordinary. But it's my colon hydrotherapy machine, I think, is number one. My Parcells Theolite is number 2, where I detoxify my food.
And did you say zeolite?
Called Theolite, T-H-E, Theolite.
Oh, Theolite. Okay.
Theolite.
What is that? Tell us about that. I haven't heard of Theolite.
No, because it's a Dr. Parcells creation where you put your food under a special lamp. I'll have to get you some information about that.
Okay.
And it's in a special field. It's in a Tesla field. There's magnets or there's wires that are in the base, and it's a special, the light is the full spectrum light. I wish I could explain it better. So
is the idea to impart photons into the food to make it more able to be nutritious?
Bioenergetic. It's more bioenergetic.
Okay.
And it takes away certain types of toxicity from the pesticides.
Amazing. Great.
Oh, yeah. We used to put colored plates on foods. And I would say if there was another thing, because I love the number 3, what would be the third thing besides the Theolite, my colon hydrotherapy machine? Probably my bathtub, because I'm a big believer in therapeutic bathing, whether it's salt and soda to get rid of radiation, or it's plain baking soda to get rid of all kinds of acidity situations. And I'm also a big believer in Epsom salt baths.
Fantastic. Yeah, those are amazing tools. What would we find in an Ann Louise Gittleman favorite smoothie?
Oh, all kinds of things that most people wouldn't drink. Let's say you'd find my Daily Greens. I help formulate a product called Daily Greens. And the reason I like that the best is I couldn't find anything on the market that I thought was balanced. It had everything but the kitchen sink in there, and I don't believe in that. So it has all the healthiest non-gluten grains. It has a hydroponically grown chlorella, which means that it doesn't have any toxins from the environment. And it's got a lot of celery leaves as well as some barley grass, which is so important for the repair of DNA. You'll find that. You'll find some diatomaceous earth. You'll find some collagen. We use a particular brand of collagen. I can't think of the name. I'm off of gelatin now because of the fact that gelatin is very high in oxalates, so I'm getting concerned about that as I get older. Because as you get older, there are different body parts that start to rear their ugly head. Mm-hmm. And you would find, what else do I use? Cran water is my basis. I use a good protein. I use our Unikey protein. It's the fat flush whey protein because it's A2 milk. not A1 milk like the whole world uses. We came out with that like 10 years ago.
Tell people when I mention A2 milk, they never seem to know what it is. And it used to be that the only place I could find it was through a mail order type thing, a Mossy, but now you can get it at pretty much any Whole Foods. So tell people just briefly, what is better about A2 milk?
It's a non-mutated milk from special cows, because what we're finding is it's the A1 milk that's so problematic with juvenile diabetes, arthritis, and heart disease.
Absolutely.
So years ago, I did some research, so we came out with this, and it's a whey. Ours is only stevia sweetened. You need something. Monk fruit is very expensive. So we have a stevia sweetened with a little inulin. I think it's delightful. And what else do I put in that smoothie? I'm not a big fruit eater.
Do you put your hemp oil in the smoothie, or do you take that separately?
Oh, no, the hemp oil goes in the smoothie. And sometimes chia seeds. I do different things every day. I'm thinking of what I would normally do. The chia seeds and some cream of tartar. I throw cream of tartar in there for the potassium because I run low. I mean, I run on my adrenals, so I need that. I put some salt in there. I need the sea salt. I'm in love now with, I like Celtic salt quite a lot. I like the Salinas. I also like real salt. I go between the two. And what other strange, weird things do I put in there? Maybe that's about it.
That's a lot of good stuff. We'll all be over for a smoothie tomorrow.
Yes.
Sounds great. So any last comments or anything that comes to mind that you would like to share with our listeners?
Gosh, we traveled the universe today.
We did. I had so much fun.
This is what we do. This is how we roll. I think, I'm trying to tell people, I think with Lyme that you can't just focus on the Lyme. I think that what is the underlying theme with all this is you've got to look at these other underlying causes. You've got to rev up your immune system to be able to handle it. I was able to get rid of a lot of my symptoms in a very short period of time by really supporting my immune system. So take a blood test, know what your numbers are, and deal with the parasites. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line with all this. Make sure that your home environment is healing and is a safe environment for regeneration. When you go to bed at night, shut off the electricity. If you have to go to the breakers yourself, you just shut it off to your room. So you try to approximate as healthy an environment as possible. Don't live on your cell phone. Unplug as much as you can. Did I do it? Let's see.
Yeah, those are fantastic. And it's amazing because go ahead.
And laugh.
I resonate with so many of the things that you've shared with us today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be here. You tossed in so many pearls and gems that I know people are going to really love. And I'm even going to go back and listen to it again and take some notes from some of the things that you said.
Kind of a stream of consciousness. You call me right after a manuscript when I'm a little overtired, so this all just flows out.
Oh, it was amazing. You have been such an educator of mine for 20 years now, since I first got sick and picked up a copy of Guess What Came to Dinner. And so I am so grateful for the work that you do. I appreciate all the information that you shared with us today. And I just want to thank you, and I'm grateful to you for being here. Thank you so much. I will talk to you very soon. To learn more about today's guest, visit AnnLouise.com. That's Ann Louise, spelled LOUISE.com. AnnLouise.com. To learn more about the products that were discussed in this interview, visit UnikeyHealth.com. That's Unikey, UNIKEY, health.com. UnikeyHealth.com. I appreciate your support of the Better Health Guy blogcasts series. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter as Better Health Guy. The show can be found on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. If you'd like to support the show, please visit betterhealthguy.com/donate. And if you'd like to be added to my newsletter, please visit betterhealthguy.com/newsletters. I'm looking forward to many more shows ahead and appreciate your interest.
Thanks for listening to this Better Health Guy blogcast with Scott, your Better Health Guy. To check out additional shows and learn more about Scott's personal journey to better health, please visit betterhealthguy.com.